going to start with chapter 5. This chapter is called Autumn. Soon the airplanes came, adding a waspy buzz to the music. I wanted to see them, but Yuri would not let me go outside. Why can't we go out? I said. They're dropping bombs, he said. I thought, this is what the enemy does? He flies overhead in his airplane. If he sees you in the street below, he reaches out and drops a bomb on your head. I pictured bombs as black iron balls about the size of a sauerkraut kettle. Every day the sirens screamed to tell us bombs were coming. We stayed in the cellar and went out at night. That's when I learned the reality of bombs. Beyond the rooftops, the city was on fire. It looked like the sun was stuck. Those were the days and nights. Some nights we were a city of two. We did not have to snatch. We simply walked into an empty shop of bakers and butchers and grocers and took whatever we pleased and walked out and walked home. We did not run. The street lights were out. Sometimes in the night, we went to the stable. The others were there. Everyone put food in a big pile. We wrestled in the food before we ate it. We clubbed each other blindly with arm-long sausages. Cigarette tips glowed orange in the dark. The horses were gone. The stableman never came shouting anymore. Then one day the sirens were silent. Yuri and I were home in our basement. Yuri said, "Stay here," and went outside. And when he came back, he said, "Let's go." He stuffed a cheese into his pocket and one into mine, and we went up and through the barber shop and into the street. We walked fast. I could not keep up. Yuri took my hand and pulled me. People were out. They were heading the way we were going. We passed the black, twisted skeletons of streetcars. Sometimes we had to trot down the middle of the street because the walls of the buildings had crumpled and spilled over the sidewalks. Stacks of sandbags were everywhere. People were hurrying. Machine guns looked like praying mantises. Airplanes flew overhead, but no bombs fell from them. I saw someone running. That's what I needed. I could not walk if someone else was running. I broke loose from Yuri. Others were running. It was a race. I didn't know where the finish line was, but I was determined to win. Many had shouted, "Stop!" but no one had ever caught me. The street was getting more and more crowded as people poured into it. I streaked through the crowds. I passed other runners. I didn't care how many there were. I would beat them all. I laughed as I ran. Then I was aware of a noise. I felt it before I heard it. It was deep and grumbling and seemed to come from beneath the streets. And there was another sound. It was like the beat of a great drum or 1,000 drums. And the more I ran, the louder it became. And now the people were mobbed, piled like bombed bricks, the spaces between them gone. But I found spaces. I always found spaces. And I darted through them. I could taste the finish line. And suddenly I broke free. I burst out of the mob. I was in nothing but space. And the drum beat was deafening. "I won," I shouted as I threw up my hands in victory. And then something hit me on the ear. And I was on the ground. And the drum beat was rolling over me. I looked up and saw boots, the tallest, blackest, shiniest boots I'd ever seen, endless columns. For an instant, I saw my gaping face in one of them. I knew what I must be seeing. Yuri had spoken often of them. I gasped aloud. Jack boots. They were magnificent. They were men attached to them. But it was as if boots were wearing the men. They did not walk like ordinary footwear, the boots. When one stood at tall, stiff attention, the other swung straight till it was so high I could have walked under it. Only then did it return to earth and the other take off, 1,000 of them swinging up as one, falling like a footstep on a single 1,000-footed giant. Leaves leaped. The parade of jackboots went on forever. Yuri told me later on that the street of the parade was so wonderfully wide that it was not even called a street, but a boulevard. And then I was in the air. The hand hoisted me up, and I dangled above the street and returned to my feet. A soldier was smiling down at me. His boots came to my shoulder, and his gray uniform was piped and spangled with silver. The brim of his hat was black and shiny like the boots. Above it glistened a silver bird that I knew the boys in the stable would have loved to steal. The soldier smiled down at me. He mussed my hair and pinched my cheek. "Tiny little Jew," he said. "Happy to see us, are you?" "I'm not a Jew," I told him. I held up my yellow stone. "I'm a gypsy." My reply delighted him. "Ah, so a gypsy. Good, very good. and he took me under both arms and lifted me and deposited me on the sidewalk at the front of the crowd. "Good day, little gypsy," he said, and then with a smile left his face, and he stood tall, and the heels of his boots snapped together with a clack, and he saluted me and marched off. The march of the jackboots went on and on. After a while, Yuri found me. "Look," I said, "the jackboots." I thought he would cheer, but he did not. He stood behind me with his hands on his shoulders. I looked at the faces of the crowd. No one was cheering or even smiling. I was surprised. Were they not thrilled by the spectacle before them? And now the deep grumbling was getting louder and beginning to overcome the drumbeat of the jackboots. I had always looked to the sky for thunder, but this thunder was coming from beneath my feet. The street itself was trembling, and then I saw them. "Yuri!" I cried. "Tanks!" he said. Colossal gray, long-snouted beetles. The tanks roared up the boulevard, 4x4, and the sky shook on its hinges as I saw at once how silly it had been to try to stop them with ditches and sandbags and machine guns. I clamped my hands over my ears. A single white flower flew out of the crowd. It bounced from the iron flank of a tank and broke into petals. I had no flowers, so I threw my cheese. Chapter 6. Yuri and I walked outside the next morning to see how it was different. The tanks were gone. The jackboots were strolling about just like us. They looked at people and spoke to each other. I couldn't stop staring at them. A crowd was running. We turned a corner. There was a large truck with the back open. Soldiers were tossing loaves of bread. The people grabbed and scrambled. We munched our cheeses, watching. I was fascinated. I had not known bread could be given. We walked on. We came to another crowd of people gathered around something on the sidewalk. "Don't," said Yuri, but I did. I squeezed my way to the front. There was a man in a long black coat on his hands and knees. He had a long gray beard. Beside him was a bucket of water. He was dipping his beard into the water and scrubbing the sidewalk with his beard. A pair of jackboot soldiers stood above him, laughing. Some of the people were laughing too. The man in black was not laughing. I came back to Yuri. I tugged on his arm. "Come see, there's a man cleaning the sidewalk with his beard." Yuri smacked my head. "You are stupid." He pulled me away. Farther on, we see something else that made us stop. Two soldiers were standing in front of another bearded man in black. One of the soldiers had a pair of scissors. He was cutting off the man's beard and the black hair that came curling down over his ears. I ran up to the soldiers. "Bring him to our place," I said. "We live in a barber shop. He can sit in our red chair. We have bottles of hair tonic." The soldiers stared at me. Yuri grabbed me. He said words to them that I could not understand. The soldiers laughed. Yuri yanked me away. We heard soldiers laughing too behind us. I thought, men in beards and long black coats do not laugh. Later that day, we sat on our beds eating chocolate babkas. Yuri said, "Stay away, jackboots." "They smile," I said. "They hate you." I laughed. "They don't hate me. They say, 'Very good, little gypsy.' They salute me. I want to be a jackboot." He smacked me in the face. My babka went flying. "You're not a jackboot. You'll never be a jackboot. You are what you are." I gathered up my babka. Still, I wanted to be right about something. "The people love the tanks," I said. "They ran to see them. They watched." "They hate the tanks." "Someone threw a flower." He gave a snort. "Coward. If the jackboots say kiss the tanks behind, some people will do it." I laughed, thinking of a tanks behind. As I lay in the bed that night, Yuri's voice came through the darkness. "You need a name." "I have one," I said. "A real one." "Why?" I doubted him. "You should have one, that's all. I want to know what to call you. Call me stupid." He laughed. "You don't remember what your parents called you?" "I don't remember parents." We were silent. I moved my fingertip over the Yellowstone. I remember a booming laugh and bright colors, the smell of a horse and the taste of something sweet, riding someone's shoulder and hair glittering in firelight. At last, Yuri's voice came again. "I had a little brother." "Is he dead?" I said. "Yes, I think so. He must be." "Did he have a name?" "Yosef." Was he little like me?" "He was, and growing fast." "Do you remember your parents?" "Yes, but less and less." I asked in the darkness, "Do you remember riding his shoulder?" But no answer came. I closed my eyes and I thought over and over of Yuri's words. "You are what you are." Which is what, I wondered. In my mind, I saw the little man in black scrubbing the sidewalk with his beard. and the other man and the laughing soldiers with the scissors, snip, snip, and the hair falling on the sidewalk, black hair falling. My eyes popped open through the blackness. There was nothing to see. "They're Jews," I blurted. Yuri snorted. "Who says you're stupid?" Chapter 7. Those were good times. Our icebox, our cellar shelves were full of food. We ate peaches and brandy and peanut butter and caviar sandwiches. We ate apples and lemon Danish and cheese puffs and hickory smoked trout. We ate candy all day long. My favorite was buttercream with hazelnut inside. There was usually only one to a candy box, and often not even that. And I was not good at telling them on sight. So I broke open chocolates by the hundreds, searching for my prize. I raced through candy shops, tossing boxes into a snack, and raced out to the usual chorus of "Stop, thief!" At home, I frantically dug for hazelnut buttercreams, flinging the rest aside. Yuri scolded me for wasting. Except for the candy, he made me finish eating everything I started. As for Yuri, he loved pickles. Big, fat, juicy pickles. He floated in barrels of brine in grocery stores. The urge would strike him suddenly. He would just pop up. "Let's go, pickle run." We went on many pickle runs because Yuri would eat only fresh pickles. If a pickle had been out of the brine more than a day, he stuck his nose up at it. This meant we had to keep finding new stores. No one ever saw him take anything, but after a while, a grocer would begin to notice that whenever a certain red-haired boy came into the store, pickles disappeared. On the way to a pickle place, I was not allowed to snatch anything. Yuri did not want his pickle run spoiled by a snatch and run of mine. But on the way back, as he contentedly ate his prize, I was allowed to do as I wished. Yuri usually took things from the store shelves and counters, except for candy. I took from people. We would be strolling along, pickle juice from Yuri's chin, spattering the sidewalk, when I would see something and take it. Off I went, weaving through the crowds of people while Yuri munched away, pretending he didn't know me. Back home, he would say, How did you do that?" I would shrug. "I just do it." "You're amazing," he would say. I would feel like a buttercream with a hazelnut heart. Sometimes Yuri went out alone. Scouting, he called it. He told me to stay put. One time I did not stay put. It was long after the jackboots came. I came into my head to go to the ground boulevard and see the parade again. That's what I believed. The parade was never ending. It went on day and night, and I was missing it. I climbed out of the cellar and started running, but when I came to the Grand Boulevard, there was no parade. There were streetcars and automobiles and people upon people, but no parade. I saw 2 jackboots coming. I ran up to them. "Where's the parade?" The tall one laughed. "You're 5 days late. It's over." I tried to understand. "Are the tanks gone?" "Not gone, Yuri. Yuri says you hate me," I told him, "but I don't believe you." "Good. I want to be a jackboot someday." The tall one said something to the other, but I could not understand the words. He reached down and ran his fingers through my short hair. "Someday, dark little boy. Are you a Jew?" "No," I said. "I'm a gypsy. Are you a Jew?" Again he smiled and said something to the other, who did not smile. "Let's hope not," he said, and they walked on. I saw a lady carrying cream puffs. Don't ask me how I knew they were cream puffs. It was a white pastry box like any other, wrapped in a white string. I just had a sense about those things. Maybe it came from snatching food for as long as I could remember. I was coming up behind her. She wore a red coat as the air was chilly. The seams of her stockings were perfect black lines running from her heels to the hem of her coat. Her blonde hair spilled from the little black hat. The pastry box dangled from one hand. She was not a screamer. Not everyone was. As I snatched the box, I heard no screams behind me, no footsteps either. She was not a chaser. Still I ran. I always ran. I did not know how not to run. That was my life. I snatched, I ran, I ate. So I was running, chased by myself, and you might say I had turned a corner and was suddenly flat on my back. I had to run into someone, a boy, with one arm. "Gypsy," he cried. "My cream puffs," I cried. They were scattered all about the sidewalk. So were his cherry turnovers. He reached for a cream puff and threw it in my face. I threw one at him. He laughed and scooped vanilla cream puff filling from our cheeks and ate it. We scooped vanilla filling and cherry goop from the sidewalk, and what we didn't eat we flung at each other. And in between we fell on our backs and laughed. Walkers veered into the streets to avoid us. Well, well, came a voice. Little thieves. It was a jackboot grinning down at us. We were gone, fast as flies, one arm one way, me in the other, the jackboot's laughter fading. I ran down alleyways. I didn't recognize where I was, but it didn't matter. I was in the city, the only world I knew. I came to a garden. Some people had little gardens in their backyards. Their gardens were all brown, stalks and stubble and fallen leaves by now, and so was this one, except for one tiny upshoot of green and red. It was a tomato plant, probably the last surviving one of the season. I knew something about seasons, but nothing of months and years. I had no use for them. I know now this must have happened in the month of October in the year of 1939. Many green tomatoes dangled from the vine, and two plump, ripe red ones. I was still hungry. I pulled off a red tomato, sat myself down, cross-legged on the ground, and ate it. The juice spilled down my chin as the pickle juice did on Yuri. I picked off another tomato. As I was eating it, I turned my eyes toward the back of the house. Someone was sitting on the step, a little girl, watching me. I never ate with someone watching me unless it was Yuri or the boys. Eating came after running, and yet I didn't move. I sat there and ate the last red tomato in the city, and I watched her watching me. Her elbows were on my knees, and her face leaned into my cupped hands. Her hair was curly and the color of bread crust. Her eyes were brown as chestnuts. They were very big. When I was finishing eating the tomato, I stood and walked off. I didn't run. When I looked back, she was still watching me. Her round, unblinking eyes made me feel as if I'd become visible, as if I'd never been seen before. When I was far from the backyard, I kept looking back. When I told Yuri I found 2 red tomatoes and ate them, he didn't believe me. On the first day the light went out, Yuri said to me, "Okay, this is who you are. Your name is Misha Pilsudski." And he told me the rest. I, Misha Pilsudski, was born a gypsy somewhere in the land of Russia. My family included 2 great-grandfathers and a great-grandmother who was 109 years old, traveling from place to place in 7 wagons pulled by 14 horses. There were 19 more horses trailing the wagons, as my father was a horse trader. My mother told fortunes with cards. She could look at cards and tell how you were going to die. She could look into your eyes and tell you the name of the person you would marry. Every night the wagon stopped into a grove of trees by the stream. The chores of us little children were to gather sticks for the fire and feed the horses. My favorite horse was a speckled mare called Greta. Every night one of my brothers hoisted me onto Greta's back and I pretended to ride. I had 7 brothers and 5 sisters. I was not the youngest, but I was the smallest. I was so small because I was once cursed by a tinker who did not like the fortune my mother gave him. Since we were gypsies, we belonged everywhere, so we came to the land of Poland. My father traded many horses. My mother told many fortunes. They were bombed by a jackboot airplane. The war had not started yet. Jackboot airplanes were simply flying about practicing for the war. The jackboot general told the pilots that they could practice on Jews and gypsies. So when the jackboot pilot saw our 7 wagons full of gypsies, he immediately dropped bombs on us, plus his goggles and everything in his pockets. Fortunately, we looked up and saw everything coming down, and we scattered. 7 wagons in 7 directions. I was with my mother and father. They were sad, but I was not, because Greta, my favorite horse, was with us. Then one night, as we were camped in a grove of trees, some Polish farmers, who hated gypsies even more than jackboots hated Jews, came with torches and tied up my mother and father and stole me and Greta. For a long time, Greta and I were slaves for the farmers. They fed us nothing but turnips and pig's milk. Then one night, Greta broke out of her stall and ran away. The next day, I ran away too. I searched and searched for Greta and my family all over Poland. Finally, I came to the city of Warsaw, where I learned to steal food to keep from starving. I never saw Greta or my parents or brothers or sisters again. And so, says Yuri, in a cellar beneath a barber shop where in Warsaw, Poland, in autumn of the year 1939, I was born, you might say. with one detail missing. I waggled my yellow stone in Yuri's face. What about this? He stared. Yes, it was your father's. He gave it to you. I was greedy. What else? Before you were kidnapped, he said. That's all. I loved my story. No sooner did I hear the words that I became my story. I loved myself. For days afterwards, I did little else but stare into the barbershop mirror, fascinated by the face that stared back. Misha Pilsudski, I kept saying. Misha Pilsudski. Misha Pilsudski. And then, with no longer than to stare at myself and repeat my name to myself, I needed to tell someone else. Chapter 8. I returned to the backyard with the tomato patch and the little girl of the eyes. She was not there. Neither were the tomatoes. Even the small green ones were gone. But arrows were there. They were painted on pieces of paper, and the papers were pierced by twigs, and the twigs were poked into the ground. I followed the arrows. They led back to a far corner of the garden. The last arrow pointed down. I dug with my fingers. I came to something. I pulled it from the dirt and brushed it off. It was the size of a walnut, and it was wrapped in a thin golden foil. I peeled off the foil. It was a piece of chocolate-covered candy. I broke it open. It was cherry. Red juice spilled onto the ground. I ate it. I licked my fingers. It was no hazelnut buttercream, but it was close. When I looked up, the little girl was on the step. Do you like it? Did you like it, she said. Yes, I said, but my favorites are buttercreams with hazelnuts. I planted it in the spring, she said. I planted a potato seed. It was supposed to be a potato, but nobody picked it when it was time to dig potatoes. Everybody missed it. She threw her arms out and shrugged to show that everyone missed it, so it became candy. That's what happens when a potato stays in the ground too long. Did you know that? No, I said. My name is Mishka Poluski. I'm a gypsy from the land of Russia. I held out my yellow stone. My father gave me this before I was kidnapped, and I told her all about myself and my family. She listened with her big eyes and her chin cupped in her hands. When I finished, she said, It's not nice to steal. What are you looking at? Your shoes, I said. I loved to look at them. They were black and as shiny as her eyes. She held her leg out, turned her ankle this way and that. She held her foot in front of her face. Look, she said. See yourself? I looked. There I was as clearly as in the barbershop mirror. I looked, and then she was laughing. I was so intent on seeing myself that I hadn't noticed she slowly lowering her foot. Now it rested on the step, and I was on my hands and knees, still looking. We both laughed. Then I said, Are you a Jew? She made her mouth like a fish and drew her breath. She put her fingers on her lips and shook her head. She cupped her hands about her. When you have a job to do your best. When you have a job to